open up our session to have a look at some of the dialogue.
Oh, yeah.
So one thing I think is really interesting in filmmaking is there is a lot of video effects, and in this case we've got a character who is all video effects, and so I wondered if you could tell us a little about the process of how you go about creating and talking about what Venom becomes.
Right. This was actually, in a lot of ways, the biggest sound design challenge of the whole film, was figuring out what does Venom's voice sound like. This was literally the first thing the director wanted to talk to me about on day one. And I spent weeks actually trying things and experimenting and just testing out all these different ways that we could process his voice. Because the director wanted it to sound obviously big and menacing and alien and exotic, but he still wanted it to be very clear. So it became kind of a blend of different processing to get to that point. And I'd like to walk you through a little bit of the process of how we got there.
So let's just pop back to Pro Tools if we can. I think the other thing we mentioned another time is when you were putting together the voice, it wasn't just a case of, well, here you go. It was a back and forward process, and you had like 30 or 40 different options.
We literally had 30 different options that we went through with the director.
Yeah,
and he ended up picking one, and then we refined it from there.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah. So let me just play you a little bit of the final version of the voice. This is a voice by itself.
Eyes, lungs, pancreas, so many snacks, so little time.
So you can hear it has a very rich, robust kind of voice. And a lot of this actually came from the original performance. It's actually Tom Hardy doing the voice of Venom. And he's doing a voice. He's altering his own voice. So that got us more than 50% of the way there to begin with. But the director felt like that wasn't exotic enough and big enough, so he wanted it to be further manipulated. So let me play you a little bit of the voice by itself with no manipulation.
Eyes, lungs, pancreas, so many snacks, so little time.
So you can hear that Tom's already doing a thing to his voice to give it some extra gravel and growl. But the first thing we did is we pitched it down a little bit. So this is the dry signal, which we're including a little bit of the dry signal and putting it in the center channel. And then I have a copy of that same material down here, and all these blue tracks here feed into this chain of death. So I want to just bypass some of this processing and show you guys what we're doing to his voice. So the first thing we're doing is we're just pitch shifting a little bit. I tested a bunch of different pitch shifters. This Soundtoys pitch shifter ended up being the one that just sounded the best for his voice for this process. So this is what we went with. It's kind of an analog style pitch shifter, kind of like a harmonizer. And it also has this drive circuit on it, which is nice because it gave it a little extra edge.
Eyes. Eyes, lungs, pancreas.
Oh, sorry, we turned on too many things.
Eye.
All right, so there we go. So here it is, just with the pitch shifting.
Eyes, lungs, pancreas, so many snacks, so little time.
So adding a bit of depth to the original performance.
Yeah, just a little, puts it a little lower in his chest, makes him feel like a bigger thing. Pretty straightforward stuff. We're using channel strip just to give it a little overall shape. I didn't want to overload the bass too much because we're adding a lot of bass later in the chain. Some of these recordings are from the set. In fact, this one is from the set. And so some of them are a bit noisy. So we're using the noise gate in the channel strip, which is a very good noise gate. And then just a little bit of light compression just to contain the performance a little bit. So that is just kind of a utility plug-in there. And then our next plug-in is the de-esser, which is also just helping with some of those sharp S sounds. And I have that before all the rest of the processing because the processing tended to emphasize all those harsh SE sounds. After that, we've got the air frequency shifter, which comes with Pro Tools HD. And this is just adding a little bit of a warble to his voice, which the director liked it having a little bit of kind of a weird, watery, liquidy sound. So let me play you that. You can hear it's got a little, adds a little bit of a waver to his voice. And it's especially interesting when he does those drawn out S's like pancreas, and you hear it go, it makes it sound almost like a snake, and I think that the director responded to that kind of feeling. The next thing is the Sound Toys effects rack, which I'm a huge fan of, because I can just stack a whole bunch of stuff up and very quickly use it like a workbench just to try things. So within this, I've got the tremolator, which is doing another layer of modulation. Phase Mistress, which is adding a little bit of a kind of swirliness to it. And Radiator, which is giving it some extra body and distortion, essentially. So let me play you guys these things by themselves, and let's see if we can hear the difference. It's a bit loud in here, but hopefully you get the idea. And then here is with Phase Mistress. You can hear that's adding a bit of a swishing kind of effect to the high register, to the air. It's kind of making it sound a little whooshy, which gives it kind of an interesting thing. And then the Radiator is actually a big part of what makes this sound cool, in my opinion, because it gives it an extra layer of gravitas and makes it gruff.
Eyes, lungs, pancreas. So many snacks, so little time.
The nice thing about using an analog style distortion box like this is that you're adding distortion, but you don't put your finger on it as being distorted. It just sounds bigger. You know, I often think about mixing sound effects, like mixing drums. You know, you just got to make it sound cool sometimes, and sometimes making it sound cool means adding distortion. So that's a tool I use all the time to just make things feel bigger, because sometimes our ears, I think, register sounds that are a little distorted or a little smushed as sounding bigger than life without it actually having to be so loud that it hurts your ears. So it's a bit of a psychological trick. So after that, we're adding some of the air ensemble. And this is essentially a chorusing effect that's adding a very liquidy kind of sound that the director was looking for.
Eyes, lungs, pancreas. So many snacks, so little time.
So just for the sake of hearing this a little bit better, let me crank this up on the mix.
Eyes, lungs, pancreas. So many snacks, so little time.
So it adds this kind of liquidy sound to the voice, which again just makes it a little more exotic. You know, this is a creature that's kind of made out of goo, so we had to figure out a way to try to impart that into his voice. The next things we're adding are kind of to shape the sound a little bit more. So I'm using the Avid Pro Multiband plugin, which is one of my favorite plugins, to control some of the harshness at the high end of his voice to make him sound big and round. You know, sometimes you adding all these processing to his voice, it's adding a little bit of harshness in the high register, which when it gets loud can be a little fatiguing on your ears. So we're just using this only for the high, mid, and high bands. We're not doing anything to the low and low mids.
Eyes, lungs, pancreas. So many snacks, so little time.
So just tickling it a little bit in a few places.
So you can hear, see it's knocking down about 4 dB off of this guy, and only in certain places. So let me just solo this register.
Eyes.
So you can hear it almost sounds like you're listening through a phone, but that frequency range is a range that can kind of poke your ears when it gets too loud. So especially when you're listening in a loud movie theater and the whole rest of the mix is already loud, you just don't want to hurt people with sound. That's my opinion. I like it to sound big and bassy and full-throated, but I don't ever want it to sound painful. Neither does this guy. So the next tool that we're using is one of my other favorites, Pro Subharmonic. So this is another Avid Pro plugin that comes with Pro Tools HD or Ultimate. Okay. And this is a subharmonic synthesizer, kind of like the old DBX 120A, but it's a much more versatile processor. I'm using it in its highest band here. It's got these 4 different bands. I'm using it in its highest register band to try to add a little extra oomph to his voice, but I don't want it to sound like subwoofer. I want it to sound like it's still connected to his voice and it's part of his vocal cavity.
Eyes, lungs, pancreas. So many snacks, so little time.
So you can hear it's adding just that extra layer of cojones to it. Let me show you just what we're adding with this.
I.
So you can hear that it's very bassy and very rich sounding, but it also still feels like you hear the performance in it, right? It's tracking with the performance of the character. So it's not just rumble. It still has a musical quality to it. You can almost still hear the words, even just listening to the bass. So we're adding that just to give it a little extra oomph. And then at the last step, we're just adding another channel strip here at the end to be able to compress it just a little bit more at the end. Maybe, we're rolling off the lows. We're rolling off everything below 60 hertz because it was just sort of too rumbly when you put it in the context of everything else. So this is what the final processing version is.
Eyes, lungs, pancreas. So many snacks, so little time.
And then we folded a little bit of the dry signal back in with that.
Eyes, lungs, pancreas. So many snacks, so little time.
So you can hear it's sort of the best of both worlds. We get the clarity of the voice, but we also get that sort of big, larger-than-life alien kind of voice along with it. So this is the basic formula that we use for his voice throughout the entire film.
Well, I think it's extraordinarily